Jingri, my name is Emma, and before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Yugambeh people as the traditional custodians of the land upon which my home and university are located. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Today, we'll be examining the concept of stereotypes in the context of their influence and impact on Indigenous Australian communities. In order to obtain a deeper understanding and appreciation of the issues raised through this discussion, we'll also be looking at some of Gordon Bennett's artwork. Bennett was an Indigenous artist born in 1955 in Queensland, and he graduated from the Queensland College of Arts in 1988 with a Bachelor of Arts, and has since had his work internationally recognised for his critical and innovative approach to contemporary ideas and issues. He unfortunately passed away in 2014. Before we assess Bennett's work, it is important to consider the meaning of the word stereotype as well as its significance. Stereotypes are formed when one group makes generalized assumptions about another based on their representative characteristics. Through this process, however, these characteristics are often overweighted and exaggerated, meaning that while they contain an element of truth, they're often largely incorrect and/or offensive. Another aspect of the formation of stereotypes is that they're dependent on the context. In other words, the stereotypes that form are also influenced by the characteristics of the people making the generalizations. Despite this, as easy as it is to identify how stereotypes can have negative impacts, it's very difficult to completely avoid reproducing generalizations and not move from talking about some people to grouping everyone together. As mentioned previously, many stereotypes have negative connotations and can demonize certain groups. The same is true for generalizations surrounding Indigenous Australians, with many popular stereotypes labeling them as being drunks, lazy, welfare-dependent, aggressive, and disrespectful. The popularization and perpetuation of harmful labels has been observed to generate damaging and self-limiting behaviours, resulting in a self-fulfilling prophecy. Due to exposure to these stereotypes, some members of these communities are led to believe that these descriptions are part of their cultural identity and they mistakenly strive to embody them, thus fueling and fulfilling the generalizations. Furthermore, this increases the deficit thinking present in the groups who perpetuate these stereotypes, which in turn can affect the life experiences and educational outcomes for Indigenous students. And a final impact that stereotypes can have is lateral violence. Stereotypes can give way to racism and oppression, which can cause members of the oppressed minority to react with harmful behaviours. However, rather than directing these actions towards the source of the oppression, they're expressed laterally towards peers and other members of their group. Evidently, stereotypes pose many threats to the Indigenous community. Indigenous artist Gordon Bennett strove to present, challenge, and question generalizations about the Indigenous Australian community through his art. In his art series Abstraction, he overlaid faces of contemporary Australian figures taken from magazines and newspapers over Aboriginal Australian figures. At the bottom of each work, he also included a word related to and often undermining the idea of citizenship and Australian identity, with words including native, city dweller, indigene, migrant, peasant, and squatter. Throughout this series, Bennett focused on challenging assumptions about geography, class, and race in relation to Australian history and identity. In particular, Bennett questioned conventional views on ideologies of self, community, and belonging. Who is really considered a native or a citizen or even an Australian? What does it mean to belong in a contemporary Australian society? Bennett's decision to use faces from mainstream Australian media is a commentary on the dominance of white Western culture and the way in which it often overrides Indigenous identity. Additionally, it is this dominant Western culture that often dictates the harmful stereotypes that surround Indigenous communities. This particular artwork is centered around the term Aborigine. It is important to note Bennett's use of the version of the term without a capital letter, which is an outdated and non-preferred term, carrying undertones of disrespect and generalization. Aside from the disrespect inherent in the word Aborigine itself, the lack of capitalization does not hold the same amount of recognition as a capital letter would. For example, capital letters are always used when referring to other cultural groups, such as Australians, Europeans, and Asians. By denying Indigenous peoples the same respect, it contributes to outdated deficit thinking, viewing these people as lesser or inferior and feeding into derogatory stereotypes. A similar issue is also present in the use of the word Aborigine, which does not effectively describe the complexity and diversity of the wide range of Aboriginal Australians. Instead, it creates a generalized picture, grouping all of them together in the same way that stereotypes do. Bennett chose this term purposefully, as it undercuts the themes of citizenship and identity. It provokes thoughts and questions about how terms such as these became the norm, and brings to light the issues inherent in generalizations. Throughout this discussion and analysis, it has become clear how many adverse effects stereotyping can have on minority groups. Not only does it contribute to deficit thinking in dominant groups, but it can also lead to self-limiting and damaging behaviours within the oppressed community, such as lateral violence. Evidently, it would be preferable to avoid such scenarios. One way of actively avoiding the spreading of stereotypes is to limit generalizations as much as possible. For example, rather than speaking about Aboriginal communities broadly and grouping them all together, take some time to research into local communities. Broaden your knowledge on the people and language groups that are nearby and learn the distinguishing features of each. Take some time to appreciate Aboriginal culture, whether it be art, song or literature. Most importantly, remember this: when you've met one Indigenous Australian, you have met one Indigenous Australian. Thank you.